Welcome to Grid Live Wrap Up. Penske dominates the desert. We'll recap INDYCAR and NASCAR race weekend. Plus, Formula One saw plenty of lead changes and a thrilling battle between Ferrari and Mercedes. Supercars, Brock Feeney's car destroyed. Worried about the next round? Welcome to the Grid Live Wrap Up program. My name is Joe Samiego, and with me we have Tanner Smith, editor from the Pit Box Press, and Kobe Lambeth from Grid Tonight. A big thank you to our Patreon investors, Colin, the show, Mark, Robin, David, Matthew, Crystal, and Nico for investing into Grid Network each and every month through Patreon, link in the video description. And very excited for everyone to tune in during the After Dark show yesterday. Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss that program. And a big thank you to everyone that follows across social media at Grid Network TV. Across social media, gridnetworktv.com. Matthew Bro, we know he'll be working on his article, and we're very excited for just another full weekend of racing. And Tanner, what a weekend of racing we had with IndyCar F1, Supercars for everyone that wanted to stay up late, depending on their time zones. And once again, 4 in a row will not happen in the NASCAR Cup Series. Tyler Reddick could not make that occur. Instead, you had a Penske Ford, with Ryan Blaney behind the wheel, taking the win. Results are still unofficial, but we'll be following online for any updates. He did this when his pit crew was lousy all day. Mike Joy mentioned a net loss of 24 positions every time they went from all their stops in pit road. Blaney, though, has such a fast car, and he's so good at this track. He made it work, got around Ty Gibbs, pulled far enough away, so even though Christopher Bell had a better tire strategy, not enough time, stayed ahead. Ryan Blaney gets his first win of 2026. Despite the win, though, that pit crew, with their performance, on Monday, is there going to be a serious look as to what went wrong throughout the day with this team?
Well, Joe, to me, it looked a lot like both issues focused on the same tire as in the left rear. I don't know why that would be, because it didn't seem that there was a right rear or right front or left front problem. It was only the left rear. So I don't know. Maybe something was just not clicking with the gun both times. I really like to not cast aspersions on folks, but yeah, definitely having some trouble with the left rear for Ryan Blaney's pit crew today. That caused them a significant amount of positions, as Joe eloquently put it. Obviously, you definitely want to take the tape back and see what's going on. You definitely want to make sure that all of the technology that you have that goes into making these very fast pit stops happen is working properly. And at the end of the day, it didn't seem to matter, because Ryan Blaney and Jonathan Hassler cooked up a very, very fast Ford Mustang Dark Horse, and they cruised to a relatively stressful but ultimately easy victory on that final restart. Once he was able to clear by Ty Gibbs, looked like he was pretty much set sail from there.
Set sail, and I just can't help but think how much they would have been better if Blaney had a pit crew that didn't lose positions, rather even just maintain better points throughout the day with those stage points, just better result overall. Much less stressful day for him, and just would have been a much more dominant win, because it looked like Ryan Blaney had the ability to just go out there and dominate this race if it wasn't for twice a loose lug nut, twice going to the back, losing stops, losing time. Just he did not have a good day at all. Managed to pull this off, something to smile about. Big thing we saw was when it came to tire degradation, that was going to be an issue. A lot of folks were wondering if Christopher Bell was going to be able to catch up. As I mentioned, Ryan Blaney was just too far ahead in the closing laps to prevent a last lap change again at Phoenix. So that was a big relief for Ryan Blaney's team. But for a lot of teams, though, they're probably feeling frustrated, maybe a little bit confused or dumbfounded as to what happened with the tire situation. Last fall, we saw failure become a major topic, especially when William Byron, in the closing stages of the race, blew a tire, sending the race into overtime. This allowed the championship to slip away from Denny Hamlin's hands. Today, we saw a bunch of tire issues, and even stage two, Tanner, under caution, we saw 3 or 4 vehicles that had tire issues, and I was just thinking, is this going to be a big mess? Stage 3 was messy. Some of it just the crashes, the hard racing, but we still had tire issues. We know the teams are always pushing the limits on the tires. If Goodyear says this is the recommended tire limit, let's try to go a little pound, half a pound extra or a full pound extra lower. NASCAR does not regulate the air pressures, but when you look at, say, Formula One, where they have the sensors and they say this is the minimum air pressure, the teams try everything from using cold air, finding ways to try to manipulate it. Because this isn't a Goodyear issue, this is a teams trying to find an advantage issue. You have thoughts on whether maybe NASCAR should monitor and maybe even enforce a minimum tire pressure requirement?
I mean, I'm certainly not necessarily opposed to that, but at the same time, for me, this represents a double-edged sword for the race teams, more or less. Yes, that extra pound, pound and a half that you are taking out of the tire might get you that half a tenth of speed that you needed, but it could also threaten the sidewall and cause a puncture that you absolutely do not want if you are intent on winning the race. So with that said, obviously the tire problems today were a little bit problematic. A ton of tires ended up going down on a number of competitors. Obviously, there was that one situation where Noah Gragson, I believe, they never ended up showing a replay to my knowledge, but I believe it seems that Noah Gragson's brake rotor blew up and it caused like 5 or 6 flat tires and the end of Cole Custer's race as well, all in one fell swoop. So when you go back and look at it, it seems that I believe both of the RCR main cars ended up having tire troubles. Even Austin Hill actually also had a tire problem. So all 3 RCR entries today suffered from tire failures. But at the end of the day, I don't think all tire pressure, or not all tire pressures, but tire punctures are created equally. So we can't really say for sure if this is all due to teams pushing the limit, which is what you're encouraged to do. And often if you do end up doing it and it works out, you're going to be more incentivized to do it. So with that said, obviously it was a little alarming the amount of failures we saw today, but at the end of the day, I would prefer the teams have the liberty to take that chance, but they also have to live with the consequences, and many, many teams dealt with the consequences today.
Consequences of going too far below, having that day ruined, just one of those deals where it could really set you back, and it did for quite a lot of teams. And that's something where I feel when you look at the teams and the drivers that have been off to a good start, taking a look at the standings, Tyler Reddick, top 10 streak still going. The top 5 and win streak, of course, snapped today. But I saw a top 10 day, and Bubba Wallace also having a good top 10 day as well.
What a race he had.
His car got a little airborne in that crash, correct? With the 48, the 1.
I don't know if it got airborne necessarily, but it definitely got pushed in on the left side a significant amount when Blue Sky, I called it the super donut, was on the side of his car. But yeah, he had an adventurous day, I believe, starting from, he qualified 28th on the grid, but ended up starting 26th because a couple cars dropped back. Had to make his way through the field all day, unlike his teammate who got to have a nice, comfortable starting spot and stay in the mix all day. Bubba Wallace's Robin Hood vehicle just had to keep taking every shot thrown at it and keep on rolling, and did a great job keeping all 4 tires on the ground and going in the right direction.
What an effort by that team to make that work. And overall, I just see where with 2311 off to the great start they are. I know Riley Herbst, that's a different topic, but when we look at 2311, where do you see them, particularly with what a lot of folks would call that big three? Let's just call this the big four potentially. We saw Gibbs, Penske, and then it seemed a little bit behind was the 2311 group and Hendrick Motorsports. Now, of course, Bowman was down in the fields. Alfredo trying to do the best he can, but one of those deals, not that great day. How would you see the big four? Do you see in the order of Gibbs, Penske, 2311, Hendrick, or do you see in a different order?
I mean, with SVG's dominance on the road courses and Zilich soon to come, I don't know how you don't have Trackhouse in that mix when, again, this is 5 races at minimum that they are going to have, at minimum, 2 cars competitive for the race victory. Unfortunately for RFK and Front Row to an even lesser extent, I definitely don't keep them in the same mix. RFK, again, kind of not really competing for wins, though Chris Buescher did have a solid run going at times today in that Artisano Fries car. But at the same time, they just do not collect the wins necessary to give me the confidence that they're going to be competitors at the end of this season. With that said, Trackhouse Racing, we have seen them compete for a title within the last 5 years. Granted, it was at the start of the next gen era, but I get caught between them being a true contender and not. I think they're kind of competing for that 5th spot with, believe it or not, Spire Motorsports, who's starting to really rise to the occasion this season. Obviously, all 3 of their cars qualified up near the front and had great showings for much of the day. I think both McDowell and Hocevar ended up sliding back on that final run because they had 2 tires. But at the end of the day, yeah, Joe, I totally agree that 2311, I think, is firmly in that mix. And if they go out and have a good run next week at Las Vegas, they'll be in even better shape heading into the next 20 weeks of the regular season. They clearly have the speed and have shown the consistency at a number of different facilities. It's just too much evidence to ignore at this point. And again, this is a team that won the regular season title with the 45 car in 2024. It's not like they haven't been here before. So I maybe a little bit too early to just dub 2311 one of the top 4 of the sport, but the evidence is seeming to mount. And not only that, Riley Herbst hasn't looked half bad as of late. So got to look at that as well. But definitely agree with the sentiment. 2311 is among the top teams in the series. And I think anybody that says otherwise is ignoring very clear and obvious evidence.
I would have to agree. I see it up there, everything you said, especially they got the regular season championship 2 years ago. They are truly contenders. A couple of comments in the chat room from the Ace. Down Under Legends coming SVG fans respectively in the 11th. Not to mention, he brought out a couple of cautions for spins. I believe one was for a tire. The other one, contact, was Austin Dillon. So kudos to him.
I'm not going to blame that one on Dillon at all. That it looked like SVG just kind of fell into his lap. But even still, at one of his most challenging tracks, SVG had a great run and a great finish to the day. So shout out to that 97 team, looking very stout to start the season, even on an oval that they're not particularly familiar with, we'll say.
Kyle Larson's quite a fortune teller, and while we need an IndyCar NASCAR double at Michigan Speedway, hashtag Michigan, then Michigan 500, my bad. Of course, Michigan 500 was the IndyCar race. NASCAR was a 400. I would love to see Michigan become a second doubleheader weekend. Your thoughts on that, Tanner?
Absolutely. Please sign me up right now. More races at Michigan. You're always going to get my vote on that, Joe. Just for everybody going forward, that is one of the best racing facilities in the country, and it is very unfortunate that it is kind of in a rural area that makes it harder to access.
100% agree. I missed the Old Michigan 500, and if we have both of them on the same weekend, that would become a very hot ticket. Amber, Joey Logano was a clown today. I
struggle with that one. I mean, yeah, we could chalk it up to, Joey Logano doing Joey Logano things, but I really do not think that contact was intentional between he and Chastain. And
yes.
For those that remember the 2022 championship finale, Ross Chastain had the same move done to him by Chase Elliott entering the third stage of that race, and Chase Elliott spun off of Ross's nose and ended his own title hopes to allow Joey Logano to ultimately win the whole thing. But the point is, Ross has seen someone be on the other side of the door when he's in the driver's seat behind and did the exact same thing as Chase. And unfortunately, unlike Elliott, he took a bunch of other cars with him. So, I mean, personally, I find that to be a bit more of a racing deal, just two cars fighting for the same amount of space. But the last wreck, I mean, when you run on the apron, you kind of have to be in better control of where your car is going to be when it comes back up onto the surface. It wasn't Joey's best work, but, I mean, we've all seen cars bottom out as they try to rejoin the surface and dive into turn number one. It's not like we haven't seen anybody make that mistake before, but definitely needed about another 5 to 6 inches of room for the 22 and ruined, again, another set of cars' days, which is rather unfortunate. But all in all, I don't know if Logano was necessarily the weapon of the week, we'll say.
Yeah, I would agree. I feel, as you said, Chastain incident, hard racing, and even the second one where AJ Allmendinger was trying to make a move, came down a little bit, and Logano coming up because he gone through that apron. Just both of them, not enough real estate. Hard racing, as everyone sees. Official results, no issues, no cars to the R&D center. So everything from the results to the stands will stand.
Thank God. I hate when we have to completely undo everything because somebody gets DQ'd. I mean, we have an article up on gridnetworktv.com about how much I despise the DQ policy if you all are very interested in reading it. But yeah, all in all, always glad to see a clean finish and a clean inspection to the end of a race weekend. Never want to have to talk about the retrospect.
Exactly. It's always a breath of fresh air. I think that's still, for me, the weakness of Formula E is just so often those results seem to change. And it's been a little less often, but 2 years ago, it just seemed almost to the point where we just waited until we finally got official word. With that said, you mentioned Ross Chastain. Not a good day. 28th place finish because of that crash. Connor Ziller sporting a Wendy's livery. And for folks, especially following online, this hamburger CEO war between McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's. I was surprised that we only had a Wendy's car. I know McDonald's not exactly 2311. Didn't see anything from Hardee's, which are on 2311. That team just looked really rough today, and they fell out. And Shane Van Gisbergen spun more than once, believe twice, as I mentioned. That brought out 2 of the 12 cautions, which I believe is a record or tied a record.
For the record, yeah.
Yet he somehow still was 10th place after we were coming to the final restart, finished 11th. 5th in the points, which is just amazing considering everything he has gone through. You mentioned about Trackhouse when I asked you about that question of the Big Four. Do you believe they're more relying now on drafting tracks and road courses for winning opportunities, or do you still feel in these mile-and-a-half ovals like Las Vegas, Charlotte, they're going to still be contenders for that win?
I mean, to be frank, Joe, I don't think we have anywhere near enough evidence to see what Connor Zelich is going to look like at one of those kinds of tracks, so I'm going to leave him kind of out of this discussion for the time being, but Ross Chastain is still a very steady driver on all of the ovals. The guy doesn't seem to have like a true weak point. I also wouldn't call him a specialist at any kind of racetrack at this point. He just finds a way to get the car into position to contend. And it doesn't really matter where you're at. So when you have that kind of a guy as a baseline to pull from for Connor Zilic and to a lesser extent SVG, who now has a year of Cup experience completely underneath his seat, I just feel like it's going to be a team that will probably start slow. I mean, obviously SVG notwithstanding, the guy has been doing very, very well to this point in the season. I don't think it's getting talked about nearly enough. With all that said, Zilic, I expected a little bit more speed out of him today. Didn't really have the luck really go his way either. Had Stenhouse kind of clip into him, and I'm sure that bent the toe in the left front of his car. But at the end of the day, I just think that this season, for the most part, for Trackhouse will probably be much of a learning experience, and you'll probably see Zilic start to really pick up the pace mid-season once we start hitting more of the road courses. So that way he gets a bit more familiarity and speed at tracks that he should compete at. Right now, though, I just don't see more than just Ross competing at Vegas, where he has really been overdue, if we're being completely honest. But with that said, SVG, I expect him to hopefully compete for a top 15 or a top 20 there at the end of that race weekend. I think that would absolutely be a win for him and a really strong way for that team to continue to capitalize on their strong opening to the season. With that said, Darlington is coming up, and that should probably strike fear in the 97 and 88 squads. But Las Vegas, Darlington, those are both tracks that Ross Chastain absolutely should have a chance to win at if Trackhouse follows through and gets him a good race car. And based off of what we've seen the past couple weeks, I'm a little hesitant to say that they're going to give him a race winning car, but if he doesn't get a top 5 or a top 10, I'd be really, really surprised.
I see him being a contender, especially at Darlington. I feel Chastain is really good there. Las Vegas, last year, Shane Van Gisbergen did not look good there. I'm thinking that might be Connor this year. Let's see what Shane can do. I mean, staying up with it where he is in the standings. In this chat room, we have Jason. Slow start again for Trackhouse. I don't think it's as bad as last year. Tanner, do you feel like? I think they're on par.
I'd say they're in a better spot. I mean, at this point in the season, you obviously had SVG have a pretty mediocre 6th place finish at COTA, which I know sounds genuinely insane, but when you look at his average finish at road courses, it's low in comparison. But he obviously made improvements this year and made it all the way up to 2nd. With that said, I mean, Zilic being a rookie, you're going to have a slow start for that 3rd car regardless. It's just going to be a massive learning experience for such a young guy who has really only been in stock cars for 2.5 years to this point. So I expect them to be better throughout the season as Connor gets more comfortable and they have more data to actually pull from somebody that's actually competing for top 15s and top 10s. The team just is in a place where they're kind of in a rebuild almost, to compare it to like stick and ball sports. I really hate to do that, y'all, but I mean, just trying to make sure this is clear. You know, they're kind of in a bit of a rebuilding year. They've got some pieces that can contend, but the whole picture is not there yet. So I expect that team to probably have 1, maybe 2 cars in the playoffs, but Connor making the playoffs just does not seem very likely at this point, though it will be very impressive to see.
That would be impressive. He would, my opinion, need to win the road courses and just really turn things around. It's a long season, but I mean, it's going to be pretty challenging for everybody because one of the things, taking a look at the NASCAR standings, here are the standings after Phoenix. Reddick, of course, a 60-point lead. Despite having the 3 wins and a top 10 finish, still a win, and you can really close in the gaps of 60 points. And you look at the top 4, less than 100 points, and then Shane Van Gisbergen, first driver at over 100 points away from the points lead. Then, further back, not on the graphic, Alex Bowman, 36 in points. Of course, he missed the race today. That was not a good deal.
How many points behind is he?
I want to say it's like 202 or something.
Oh
Then
my!
you have
Wow.
then you have Josh Berry, 31st in points, despite having a clean Daytona weekend. That team, his luck just seems to be prone to just get in crashes. Some of them not on his own, like today, wrong place, wrong time when Joey Logano got in that big crash. Same with Austin Cindric, way down there low, 30th in points. And Austin Dillon, 29th in points, which we know he's good at Richmond, but you can't just win and you're in the playoffs. You could win Richmond, that's great, but if that's the only one, you're probably not going to make the top 16. We highlighted in this the drivers that were outside of the top 10 at Daytona, and I was sort of surprised. Only 4 drivers, Shane Van Gisbergen, Christopher Bell, Michael McDowell, Kyle Larson, were outside the top 10 after Daytona in the point standings. Considering we've looked a lot at which drivers have had top 10 finishes, with Reddick being the only one that's 4-4 in top 10 finishes. Some drivers have put in an effort, and you mentioned about Shane Van Gisbergen being a little bit underrated. He was 28th in the points after Daytona and has climbed up. Mm-hmm. Christopher Bell was 31st in the points and has climbed up to get to 6th. Michael McDowell, Kyle Larson were both within the top 20 after Daytona. But it just, I think, really shows that what SVG and Christopher Bell have done since Daytona to just turn their season around. Mm-hmm. But everyone else, from Buescher, Logano, Elliott, Watts, Blaney, Reddick, have all been in the top 10 since Daytona. Are you surprised by how there has been little change with only 4 drivers getting into the top 10 since Daytona?
I mean, to some extent, yes. To some extent, no. I mean, let's take a look here at the drivers that are being talked about. Tyler Reddick, Ryan Blaney, those, in my opinion, are 2 of the top 7 drivers in the sport. And it's really not that much of a debate at this point. Bubba Wallace is a guy that had a very strong 2025 and just seems to keep building season after season, different aspects of his craft that allow him to continue to be more competitive week in and week out. I mean, honestly, if you go back to 2021, 2022, Bubba Wallace, that big dent in the side of his car probably would not have gone the same way that it went today. He has done a lot of growth in these past few years, and you're seeing it show up in these results. Below that, you obviously had, let's see, just trying to get those points back up. Yep, we have Chase Elliott, a guy who today was a horrible day for that 9 team, got swept into at least 2 accidents. It may have been 3. But to still be 4th in the points after these 4 races is very impressive. SVG, massive improvement over last year. But again, we had 2 drafting tracks, and we also had the road course where I believe he won stage 1. Yes, stage 1 last week at COTA. So obviously has those points as well. Christopher Bell's another one of those top 7 in the sport, in my opinion. Does not surprise me even after that Daytona and Atlanta wreck that he has made his way back into the points picture. Joey Logano is a multi-time champion of the sport, definitely in that top 7 conversation year in and year out. Michael McDowell, again, very solid super speedway racer, very good at these drafting tracks, and a pretty strong road racer in the next-gen era. So it doesn't really surprise to see him stay in this mix, even though his results today and his running position today was actually very impressive. Then you got Chris Buescher in 9th, steady Eddie of the Cup Series, just pulling RFK along. And then obviously got Kyle Larson, the defending champion, and then Byron Hamlin behind him. Again, some of the best drivers in the sport. And then it kind of gets a bit jumbled up after that. Obviously got AJ Allmendinger, who, in my opinion, at this point in the season is very much overachieving, but you've got to really be pleased if you're Kaulig Racing to be in the mix after 4 weeks. Carson Hocevar has shown a lot of flash, just not getting the results that you would expect. Ty Gibbs kind of having the exact opposite, not showing a whole lot of flash, but getting some good results. And then Brad Keselowski, who I expect him to get stronger as the season wears on. But as far as seeing the people that are in the top 10, I'm not terribly surprised to this point, as I feel that we've had schedules that benefit most of those drivers, and then the other ones are kind of just the usual suspects.
The usual suspects we anticipate, I think Reddick, Larson, Logano. I will be honest, Shane Vanker still does very much surprise me. Just been very under the radar until really Coda was like, he's fifth in the points, and now still fifth in the points. In the chat room, we got a comment from Jason. His comment is Suarez, big hit today on the track and the points. Yeah, 17th in the points. Rough day for him, but still 17th in the points very early in the season, and all the Spire cars off to a great start. I mean, it looked like for a while Carson Hocevar may steal a win today. Just didn't pan out. Some people were even comparing him to Christian Rasmussen yesterday, which that win also didn't pan out. Overall, just not good effort. One driver, before we end this segment, I want to bring up because I feel like it's been a rough start to the year. Chase Briscoe. My goodness. Crashed really hard and was done for not having a good start, considering it looked like he was going to have a great finish at Daytona 500, and that all went up in smoke. And everything else has just been going wrong. He's just said he has had no luck. Fast cars, but just no luck. Are you surprised by this start by Briscoe? And here we are coming to Las Vegas. This will be 5 races in the year. How hard is it going to be for him to start climbing out of that hole?
I don't think it'll be too big of a problem, to be honest. I think that JGR is a strong race team, even despite all of this lawsuit drama going off the racetrack. They've obviously built the 19 team up into be a stalwart unit at the top of the Cup Series stack here. And personally, I feel that they'll be definitely in the mix by the time we get to Charlotte. If they're not in the chase by then, I think that's when you need to start throwing your red alerts up, to be completely fair. I think they kind of had a similar situation happen at the start of last season, and they managed to bounce back. And obviously we're in a different system, but at the end of the day, I think the 19 team and even the 48 team, if Bowman can get back in time, I think if he misses up to Darlington, that's probably the dividing line for the 48 team. With that said, I don't think anybody that's, not in the mix right now can't find themselves in the mix. Still a lot of racing to go. I mean, think about the results to this point in the season that Brad Keselowski has had. Outside of the Daytona 500, he hasn't exactly had many strong runs, and he's still in the chase. So I think a few good races from cars that are built by good teams should result in these drivers getting back in the mix. It'll just take a little bit of consistency and the momentum starting to work the other way.
Momentum goes a long way in turning a season around, and Chase Briscoe, I feel he could go to Vegas, get that win, and then all of a sudden, if he has the momentum, the top 10 finishes and everything, he'll be in a good spot. And I mean, we got to remember what Mike Joyce said at the beginning of the show. Many teams see this as the true start of the season, because now we're going to get into the 1.5 mile ovals, the meat and butter of this season. It's going to be a lot of fun to see how the points will continue to shape up. We got, of course, the sprinkling of road course races. You got Talladega. That's going to be in there too. That's going to shake things up. Lots to look forward to in this NASCAR regular season. Of course, as we mentioned, the results are official, so there'll be no changes or anything. We'll be following the full season of NASCAR right here on the Grid Network. Now let's switch over to Formula One. With Formula One, the season has started, and Tanner, we had some pretty good on-track racing and a lot of overtakes.
Indeed, we did, Joe. So the Australian Grand Prix saw some exciting action for the lead in the opening laps between George Russell of Mercedes and Charles Leclerc of Ferrari. But Ferrari not pitting during the first two safety car periods meant that they had to pit under green. Despite 13 laps of fresher rubber, nothing stopped the pace of Mercedes. Russell led a Mercedes 1-2 finish with Kimi Antonelli ahead of Leclerc. Mercedes scored the maximum amount of points for the race weekend with Ferrari in second. McLaren, Red Bull, Haas, Racing Bulls, Audi, and Alpine all had one car in the top 10. Kobe, starting with you, do you anticipate Mercedes being the favorite next weekend to sweep the front row in China?
Yeah, Tanner, I think that's a strong possibility after what we saw in Australia. And man, it seemed like those Mercedes were in a class of their own. I know the Ferraris give them a really good fight, but if I had to pick between the two right now, I'd definitely go for Mercedes because I think it was just over a decade ago when we had new regulations, who came out and at the very start of it and dusted the field. It was Mercedes, and it seemed like over a decade later, history has repeated itself and look like Mercedes have figured this out. The engine is extremely strong. The car they built, is fantastic, and this is a huge opportunity, for George Russell particularly because he's watched a lot of his highly touted peers have success. Watching Max Verstappen, win multiple world championships. Watching Lando Norris become a world champion as well. Oscar Piastri, find success. And then you look at George Russell, who many believe if you give him the right car, he can, join them and achieve world champion status at some point in his career. And so far, the Mercedes car has really held him back from showing what he can do. And if Australia is an early indication of where this could go, I think, this could potentially be the year for George Russell to show up and show out all throughout the year that he is that driver that many thought he could be, to fill the shoes of Lewis Hamilton as the number one driver when he left for Ferrari and to lead this team forward. And we're looking forward to seeing what George can do throughout the year. And also, Kimi Antonelli as well. Kimi had a not so good start, lost multiple positions, and he was able to come back up through the field, and give Mercedes a 1-2 finish. I'm sure when he crashed the car, on the prior day, Toto Wolff and the squad were not really happy about that. But I think this run-up finish and podium, certainly made up for it. And I think that this is an important year of growth for Kimi. I don't know if he'll be able to keep up with George, all year round for the championship, but I think we should potentially see Kimi Antonelli get his first Grand Prix race win at some point later on this season. But it's a great time to be Mercedes, and I think they'll definitely be the favorites in China. But given the fact China's a lot different than the Albert Park street circuit, with the long straights and the track overall is just way more technical. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see how things look in week 2 of Formula One this year.
Yeah, week 2 for Formula One this year at Shanghai, China. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how the Mercedes teams come out the gate. If they're looking fast and unbeatable early on, it's going to be a long weekend because remember, we have the sprint race this year at the Chinese Grand Prix race weekend. 16 corners at that track, and you have the long front straightaway, then a long straightaway in Sector 3. But in Sector 2, it's a lot of these curves where a little bit similar to Melbourne, but the long straightaways. I think we could have a very interesting race if what we saw in Melbourne using the energy recovery to battle for the lead. Exiting turn 3 all the way up to turn 9, I think could be a lot of fun of racing. Just a matter of being smart about it. We saw George Russell was a bit irritated with how he claimed Charles Leclerc raced him. That was a little bit on the unsafe side. A lot of people say, well, that's just George Russell being George Russell. At the end of the day, he has to feel good that we have one of the best cars on the grid. If we run our own race, if we don't make mistakes, we're going to be hard to beat for everybody. I mean, even with what they did in the race and how Ferrari responded, they could say, okay, we did not make that mistake. They made that mistake. We capitalized. We got to win. So I really see that's going to be a Mercedes favorite for the next race weekend, especially to get a fast start and they look strong in that sprint race. I think everybody in the field will be in trouble.
No doubt the Silver Arrows definitely showed their strengths this past weekend, but as you noted, Joe, and you as well, Kobe, China is a lot different of a racetrack, so could require a different skill set from Mercedes. Moving on to the team that finished second, not on the racetrack, but in the constructors for this weekend, Ferrari had a monster start with Leclerc jumping out to the lead, exiting the first corner, sprinting by everybody in front of him. Lewis Hamilton also got a very strong start as well and ended up being a contender for the podium for much of the race, ultimately claiming fourth. So, Joe, kicking it back to you, were you surprised by Ferrari's pace, especially ahead of McLaren and Red Bull?
I was very surprised by their pace because we didn't know what to anticipate. I honestly felt Lando Norris was going to have more pace, be up there, honestly, looking for that third place position. Really curious to see how Isaac Hadjar would have done long term, but unfortunately his engine gave up. So it was a big surprise for me to see the Ferraris just up there battling. And Charles Leclerc, that start was just amazing to watch. And watching the replays of it, how he maneuvered around Hadjar. Of course, Kimi Antonelli had that really slow, poor start. And then to make the move to the inside to exit turn one with the lead, what an effort by him. I think this team has the car to get it done. I know a lot of folks were saying, well, they screwed up with the strategy. We heard Lewis Hamilton. Why didn't you split us? Or why didn't you pit both of us? I think this is going to be a good opportunity for Ferrari to say, hey, we have a car that could go out there and win. How can we be better when it comes to strategy? When it comes to the pit calls? And I think they will be tough to beat. And if it is that good where they're up there with the Mercedes, that's going to be trouble for the Red Bull McLaren duo to try to catch up. But it's a long season. Nicole and I said it, 24 races down to 23, plus those sprint races. Still a long way before we could say they're going to be second or maybe even first in the constructors.
Well, I wasn't really surprised by Ferrari's pace because they were really strong in preseason testing, and then we saw them set some really good lap times and in practice and then obviously qualifying as well. I think that Ferrari is off to a good start right now with the car, everything they have going on. But as you mentioned, the strategy is basically a different year, but the same issue that's been plaguing Ferrari for so many years. They just cannot get strategy right for whatever reason. And it always ends up biting them in the rear end at the end of the day. So I'm not looking at Ferrari to fix the strategy issues anytime soon because it's really always been a thing with that organization. I just don't know what it is with Ferrari and strategy. It's just always a mess. And at one point during the race, we heard Lewis Hamilton on the radio that Lewis was essentially calling his own strategy because he didn't understand what his strategist is trying to do. And Lewis was like, no, like leave me out on these tires and all of that. Because even Lewis saw that the strategy was going nowhere with Ferrari. Yeah, but hopefully they can minimize whatever damage is done with some of its strategic decisions. I think Ferrari have a real chance to actually do something this year. So it's not per se a runaway at the front by Mercedes. But yeah, looking at Ferrari, compared to McLaren and Red Bull, definitely interesting. To see that they appear to be second best behind the Mercedes, and then let McLaren have some work to do. And, obviously Red Bull as well. It would have been interesting to see like how Max Verstappen would have done in the Grand Prix if he hadn't have crashed out of Q1. If he would have started towards the front, I wonder if Max could have taken that Red Bull forward towards the front of the field. But luckily we'll have a chance to see it again this coming week when Formula One goes to Shanghai, China. And I believe we have a question in the chat. If we can display that, Jason is asking, is Formula One turning into Formula E with energy management? Well, Jason, if you checked out one of our recent episodes of Grit Tonight, I think it might have been a couple of weeks ago, we talked about Max Verstappen's comments, about the new regulations when he basically said that this is Formula E on steroids. And during the early stages of the race, we saw a lot of swapping back and forth, towards the front of the field. Some people even like into the Peloton style racing we see in Formula E. Yeah, so I guess you can say maybe the start of the race was a little Formula E like, and then as the race went on, it got spread out and it just became a traditional Formula One Grand Prix. These new regulations is definitely really interesting to see how it works with the management of with the energy management, and then also the battery deployment as well is really crazy. You see Formula One car going down the straight, and all of a sudden, it slows down, and then the car behind it, gets a big run and ends up overtaking. That's going to take a lot of getting used to. I do wonder, later on in the season that if we could potentially see a big accident, due to that, because the driver behind may not be on his P's and Q's, it may not, anticipate the driver ahead slowing down. We might see what people in Europe like to call an aeroplane crash. So hopefully that doesn't happen, but but these new regulations are going to take a while for everyone to learn. As Sergio Perez said, that this is not the Formula One that he once knew, and it's a different style of Grand Prix racing. This is not a traditional style of Formula One racing that we've gotten used to. This is as they've been said, it's the largest regulations change in the history of Formula One, because the engine and the chassis, change, so much, in one, regulations change.
Indeed, Kobe. Thank you, Jason, for that great question. Definitely seeming like we're going to be getting a bit more cat and mouse style racing, where you're trying to catch your opponent out at the right possible time to make sure you strike with just enough battery remaining to keep that lead after you take it. Will be interesting to see, especially at a track like China, how that's going to play out. But moving on, we obviously saw that last year everyone felt bad for Isaac Hadjar after the rookie crashed on the warm-up lap before his debut race began. This year, Oscar Piastri, a title contender last year, was on his way to the grid and unfortunately befell the same fate as Hadjar last year, crashing out of his home Grand Prix prior to even taking the green flag. Lots of disappointment for a legion of Australian fans that were sporting green and yellow in support of their countrymen did not get to watch their driver, Oscar Piastri, even make it to the grid to take the green flag. So, Kobe, throwing this back to you, how much of a setback is this for Piastri and his World Drivers' Championship hopes?
Well, I view this as more of embarrassment than I do a setback for his championship hopes, because if you look at the McLaren right now, it doesn't look like they're going to be in the mix for the championship. Well, at this point of the season, because Australia didn't really go well for them, and Lando Norris, the sole McLaren in the race, he just did not have the pace to contend with the front runner. So championship hopes for McLaren this year, if we don't see a dramatic change in the running order throughout the course of the season, the chances of them winning a World Drivers' Championship may not materialize this year. But it's still just way too early to say whether or not McLaren will be competitive or not. But for Oscar Piastri, I think that right now that this was just a really embarrassing moment to have something like this happen. You don't even get to participate in your home Grand Prix, and as soon as it happened, they turned to the stands. You could see all the Aussie fans, all the Piastri fans, the people wearing the papaya orange colors to support McLaren. They were stunned in disbelief to see that this could happen to Oscar Piastri, because a lot of these people, I guarantee you, the only reason why they come to this race was to see Oscar Piastri race, because they're so proud of their countryman and what he's been able to do on the pinnacle of motorsport, representing Australia on the world stage, and for these people to come out to Albert Park and to see him crash out on the lap coming to the grid, just definitely a heartbreaking situation for that to happen. But I'm sure Oscar's pride is a little bit wounded after something like this, but he's strong, and he's going to be able to recover from this. So as hard as it is, he's going to have to forget about this little embarrassment that happened, and he'll have to start fresh when we get to Shanghai this coming week. And that's really the only thing you can do in this situation, that you just have to put it behind you and move on. You can't let it linger. Although it was an incredibly embarrassing situation.
Incredibly embarrassing situation. I would agree in that. The one sense where I feel it could be a setback, and I say could because it's such a long season, and with 24 races and all the sprint races, is the fact that everyone's going to have a better idea how to use these cars in the race when it comes to energy management, the active aero. They all got one race down. He doesn't even have a start down because he didn't even make it to the grid. And we saw how for Kimi Antonelli, that was a big deal. Liam Lawson, a really poor start. Everyone got a lot better after this race. He did not. I think that's something where the simulators are not going to be able to replicate that lost time. So he is going to be a little bit behind the 8 ball when it comes to everyone else. Still, with such a long season, he's going to catch up. I have confidence, as you said, Kobe, that he's going to put this out of his head, focus on China, go out there, try to get a win, and prove I can still get the job done. Without a doubt, he's going to, I think, have a good, strong season. It's going to be a minor setback. It's going to be temporary, but it's no way means that he's going to be done for when it comes to the championship, because that McLaren can still get much better and better as the season goes along and contend with the Mercedes and the Ferraris for potential wins. So embarrassing, 100%. Setback, temporarily, but he cannot overcome it. He will overcome this and be a contender, I see.
Yeah, I mean, last year he had a similar problem in this race that didn't end up going his way, and I think wound up in 9th, so only got a couple points for his troubles that day. I mean, what's the difference really when it's a difference of a couple points when you're coming out of the race weekend like this? So we've seen Piastri dig his way out of these holes before. I feel like we can see him do that again. Now, moving on to some comments here, we got another one from Amber. F1 oval race, gentlemen. How do you respond to that?
I think it's safe to say that's something that will never happen. As exciting as that may be to see Formula One race on an oval, I unfortunately I just don't see that as a realistic possibility. But but I'm sure if you have iRacing or whatever, I don't know if F1 cars are on iRacing. If they are, I guess you could do an oval race that way. That might be the closest thing for something like that becoming a reality.
Joe, you got anything to add?
Yeah, I think the closest thing to an oval race we ever had in F1 was 2020 when the Bahrain circuit, and they had the Secure Grand Prix that less than 50 seconds, less than a minute lap times. But with these cars and all that, I could see the idea. Maybe you're thinking like a big pack, but that may end up in disaster. So I just don't see F1 doing that unless for some reason we need to make up a race. But it doesn't look like Bahrain will be the venue for that.
Indeed. Speaking of Bahrain, we do have another question from Ace Steeler here. I heard Australia is in line for a second race to replace the cancellation of both Bahrain and Saudi Arabia's events. Is this true? Kobe, you said that you had something to remark on this?
Yes. And I believe this comment is from one of our longtime viewers, Denver. You know, it's really weird because YouTube when YouTube did an update, it changed around like your actual name and like put like your ad on there. So that's why it's getting kind of confusing for us to try to keep up with who's chatting. I'm trying to memorize all of these I guess profile pictures, so I can remember who our viewers are. But it'd be very helpful if you guys went into your YouTube profile settings, and went back and changed it manually so we can know who you guys are. And getting back to the question that you asked here, Denver, I haven't heard anything at all about Australia getting a second race to make up for the potential cancellations of the Bahrain or Saudi Arabian Grand Prix events. But Sky Sports F1 reported over the weekend that that there's a possibility that Formula One may just end up just canceling them altogether and not making them up. And as we talked about on Grid tonight, we actually looked at the European circuits, that could potentially be available, the Grade 1 circuits to make up, for those weekends, and they're all booked, that weekend. So it's not, so it's probably not going to be a possibility for getting those circuits, or as Matt White suggested on Wednesday night, maybe Formula One will pay those series a handsome ransom, get them a nice little payout, to clear out, and then F1 will go there. So maybe that could be a possibility, but who really knows at this point? But as of right now, Denver, there's no word on a second race in Australia to replace the Bahrain and Saudi Arabia on the schedule, as Sky Sports reported. We may just see a shortened F1 calendar season, dropping, I believe, from 24 to 22 race events. I'm sure the paddock would be very happy with that, as many have already complained that we're already, adding too many miles traveling all over the globe because, Formula One is the traveling circus worldwide.
I was just going to suggest, would dropping a couple races really be so bad?
Not at all.
Joe, anything to add on the potential of a second race in Australia?
No, I have not heard that rumor. Originally, I heard the rumors of like maybe Portimao or another venue like Imola, but they got races going on.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and Europe would be the best bet because it would just be a traveling headache. Okay, we're going back to Australia. Okay, we're going to South America or even North America. So unless they were to get a venue to say, hey, will you host a second race like they did with Silverstone in 2020? I just don't see that happening. And the 22 race season, I don't think it will be any fan ticket holder will be disappointed when the two races canceled. But I think for the teams and the drivers, be okay, a little bit of a break.
Definitely. Denver popped in again saying the Australian GP is a curse for Australian F1 drivers, and it's really hard to argue against that at this point. We also have another comment here from Ben clarifying that, yes, the Indy 500 used to count as a Formula One World Championship event for a good bit of years. So they have run some oval races in Formula One. It's just probably not something they're looking to harken back to anytime soon, if I had to take a guess. Moving on to our final question here, though. Max Verstappen started out Sunday's race in last on the grid after crashing out of Q1, as Oscar Piastri and Nico Hülkenberg didn't even start the race. 6 cars finished on the lead lap, and 16 finished the race. Some notable surprises were Arvid Lindblad and Gabriel Bortoleto finishing 8th and 9th, respectively. Very strong runs from both of those two youngsters. The cursed Red Bull second seat struck once again as Isaac Hadjar's engine expired. And you also had Sergio Perez carrying the flag for Cadillac, finishing in 16th as Valtteri Bottas retired on lap 11. Joe, what are your thoughts generally about this race in general and how it turned out, and just some storylines that you'll be looking out for as we head to Shanghai?
Overall, I enjoyed the race. I know some people talk about, oh, well, that was energy management. It was almost, some would call Formula E-ish style of racing up front, but still, you have drivers pushing at the tops of their limits of their cars, racing each other for the win. I mean, we saw George Russell locked up the tires. So overall, I thought it was really good. And considering there was a lot of fears that we would have little to no passing, well, Max Verstappen, granted, he's Max Verstappen, proved you can pass with these cars. Lewis Hamilton was catching up. He said he wished the race was longer because he would have gotten that podium step. So I see a lot of promise with this package. The thing is, what's going to happen? Will the competition get closer and closer, or like past packages, the team finds the advantage and then just get more spread out between the teams that got it made, figured out, and those that don't? Like in this case, Aston Martin, which they retired the cars very early. So overall, I think it was very good. Shows the potential. Versus China, I think the big storyline I'm looking at, can George Russell make it 2 in a row? He will love to do that. Mercedes still love to have 2 in a row, and especially if it's a 1-2 finish. But Kimi Antonelli, I mean, what could have he done if he didn't crash in practice and had to have that car rebuilt? Could he be a contender for the race win? Lewis Hamilton, I have a feeling he might be one contending for the win. He got the sprint race win last year. We know what happened at Grand Prix where the double disqualification for the Ferrari teams ruined their weekend. This might be a track where he feels he has a shot at the win. Just a matter of getting that Ferrari team, the strategy, and the car right setup-wise. I think a lot of focus will be on Oscar Piastri just after the disappointment of not starting this race. He's back, but now his teammate, Lando Norris, 5th in the points. People always talk about papaya rules, and those two, I don't see papaya rules coming in, but he has a lot of points to make up. Can he make it? And where's Lando Norris going to be in this race? Because at the end of the day, I felt in Australia, Lando Norris was pretty much quiet, not really talked about much until near the end when Max Verstappen started challenging him for the position. So those are some of the storylines I'll be looking at China.
Yeah. For me, looking at the Australian Grand Prix as a whole, I think it was a race of learning, in many respects, since, as I mentioned, this is the largest regulations change in the history of Formula One. And I think, drivers are obviously going to be quick learners. And once they get a few races on their belt, I think we'll be off and running and understanding, how the racing will look moving forward. And obviously, Mercedes will let the ones to beat this year. It'll be interesting to see if anybody can, catch up to them. And we'll also be following Aston Martin as well. And I will say, to their credit, Aston Martin ran a lot better in this race than I expected them to do. Although, they ended up both retiring from the race as expected. They went a lot longer than we thought they were. We thought they were either going to run a few laps, in like a starting park situation. But thankfully, that was the worst case scenario, and that did not. And that the cars, went a lot further than many thought. And so kudos to, Aston Martin and Honda for being able to get the cars, as far into the race as we did. Because as if you watched our showing grid tonight, we were not very hopeful that Aston Martin were going to make it past lap 5, that they were going to either retire the car or break down during the first opening laps. And I think the team were able to collect a lot of great data that they can use, for future development of this car throughout the season, as we know it's going to need a lot. And giving, what Fernando Alonso was able to do in qualifying with the lap that he put down. Yes, it was, not towards the front or anything like that, but it showed that if they can, get a reliable car and a reliable Honda engine, that maybe this car could be competitive at some point towards the midfield. So I think there are some positives that Aston Martin can take away from this race weekend. That yes, some parts of the weekend or the lead up were embarrassing for Aston Martin, but the race itself, I have to give them credit for, persevering, because this could have been a whole lot worse. And I think they did their best, in avoiding a worst case scenario here. And also got to give a call to the Cadillac Formula One team. Very first race for them in Formula One, very, very exciting time for Cadillac. I know, Valtteri Bottas, retired from the race, but it was good that Sergio Perez was able to finish, for Cadillac to get that going. I know Cadillac, is obviously towards the back of the grid right now, and it's going to be a fun storyline to watch to see how they develop, throughout the Formula One season, to see if they can try to get closer to the other cars and, not be towards the back of the grid. But I do think it's going to be a long season of learning for the Cadillac Formula One team. So, and I'm sure a lot of people stateside are going to be excited to see how they'll be able to get along throughout the year. As we know, they do have a lot of people who have Formula One experience on that program, working with other teams, and we'll see how they do as the season progresses.
Indeed, we shall, and definitely a lot of support from their hometown crowd here in the States. Cadillac has a lot of learning left to go, it seems, before they're able to really compete. But that'll be enough out of the Melbourne race weekend over there in Formula One. We have one more comment here from Jason. Racing Bulls looked good. Arvid Lindblad definitely had a very strong race. Liam Lawson a little bit less so, but at the same time, spectacular debut for Lindblad. With that said, we're going to take our open wheel coverage from Australia all the way back to Phoenix, where we had a doubleheader race weekend between INDYCAR and NASCAR. So, Kobe, off to you. What happened in Phoenix?
Yeah, we may not be getting an F1 oval race anytime soon, but we did have a short oval race at Phoenix Raceway. And after the Phoenix race, we saw a major shakeup in the NTT IndyCar Series standings. And for the first time in over 620 days, since June 22nd, 2024 to be precise, Alex Palou is not the championship points leader. Josef Newgarden, leads after a 7th place finish at St. Pete last week and a late race pass on Kyle Kirkwood to take the lead and win the Good Ranchers 250 in the Valley of the Sun. Last week, we said that this could be the race where everyone hopes to capitalize on Palou's win at St. Pete. Newgarden was up front, but not a dominant force until a late pit stop for fresh tires. Joe, starting with you, Can this win give Newgarden the momentum to propel him to be a serious contender on the streets of Arlington? Got a brand new track this weekend in the Dallas area.
It's a brand new track, as you said, and that's why I feel he will be a contender for the win this race weekend at Arlington. He looked really good, and let's remember St. Pete, poor qualifying effort, but came up to the top 10. That's a good start. It's not exactly a Penske perfect start, but it is something where you're getting those points because what happened the weekend after? Well, you're going to be in the oval. Everyone sees him as the oval master. Iowa's no longer on the calendar. So he had to make the most of Phoenix, and he did. Get in the 4 tires late in the race, capitalizing it, getting around Pato O'Ward, who also had 4 tires. That's always a battle getting around Pato O'Ward in an oval. So getting that done, getting around Rasmussen, getting around Kyle Kirkwood. Great effort. He has to feel really good. He looked genuinely ecstatic. And then when you look at his last 5 races, yeah, Portland was not a good race, but then since then, 2 7th place finishes, 2 wins. So I think he's going to be feeling a lot of momentum entering Texas. I don't see why he'll be struggling there when everyone else is going to be in the same boat as them. Penske has the resources. They have the capacity within the teams or the experience, and he is a talented driver. And I think he could really show he will be a contender for the championship. So I got my eyes on Josef Newgarden this weekend.
I'd say conversely, Joe, I'm a little bit more on the other side of the fence. While I do think that this win and a very solid run at St. Pete after a horror show of a qualifying session, Josef Newgarden should be feeling a lot of great momentum heading into a brand new racetrack. And I think that momentum might propel him to a top 10 once again, like he had at St. Pete. But I'm definitely going to be a little bit more cautious when it comes to penciling him in as a contender for the race win. I would definitely have his teammate Scott McLaughlin a little bit higher than him personally, but at the same time, you've also got to look at both Palou and Scott Dixon of Chip Ganassi Racing, and Will Power is still going to be very, very hungry to prove himself and all of the doubters wrong that he should have stayed at Team Penske. So I will be very much looking forward to next race weekend, but I'm not as confident that Newgarden's going to be a contender for the race victory, but a top 5 or a podium would absolutely be very helpful to his championship chances.
Yeah, certainly. It's going to be fun to watch the IndyCar drivers tackle this new street circuit, right at the Dallas Cowboys stadium. And definitely a highly anticipated event that we're all going to be, glued to our TVs to check out this an inaugural event. As, it seems like IndyCar is trying to have their version of the Miami Grand Prix on their circuit. As we know, Formula One uses the Miami Dolphins Stadium to host their race, and now the IndyCar is using the Dallas Cowboys Stadium. So looking forward to seeing how that all shapes out next weekend. I certainly think that Newgarden could potentially be in the mix, along with everyone else. When you have a brand new track, it's basically anyone's game. But I do agree, with Tanner when it comes to like the road and the street courses that Scott McLaughlin, I would probably rate him just a little bit higher, to figure it out, before like Josef Newgarden would. But I certainly think Newgarden could potentially be in the mix, but we'll have to wait and see how the practice and qualifying sessions turn out before we know who could be the contenders in next week's Dallas street race. And while Newgarden, took the win, he and everyone else were lucky when Christian Rasmussen's chances of winning the race ended. Rasmussen had the best car in the field, and he looked destined to win. But after colliding with Will Power exiting the corner leading to the backstretch, it was game over. Rasmussen went high, but Power said he didn't know it was there. They basically squeezed him into the wall. It disappointed Rasmussen. Talked to Power after the race, was very apologetic. Power even found team owner Ed Carpenter after the race and apologized and took full responsibility for the incident. But Rasmussen, he listened to Power, but he did warn him, telling him that he knows what to expect on his outside going forward from him. So, Tanner, do you believe that this was a racing incident? Which driver was at fault, and what do you think of Rasmussen's warning to Power?
Well, it's a really tough one. So I think if you compare this to the incident that happened very early in the race between Alex Palou and Rinus VeeKay, I saw a lot of that happening on social media, but I think there's a clear difference between the two. In the first instance, where it's VK going onto the outside of Palou on corner exit and onto the straight, and Palou continued to clear up onto the straight and into VK and then subsequently into the wall, I actually felt that was more on Palou because you need to have way more awareness of the surroundings you have when you're on the straightaway, especially. So that one to me was pretty much clearly going to be Palou's fault. And in fact, in the post race for him interview that he did with Fox, it certainly seemed that he was taking responsibility for the incident by saying that I didn't even know he was there. I will say that the power one to me was a little bit more of a racing deal because I think that Rasmussen was a little bit less there than VK was on Palou, but this was also directly on corner exit. And they did a pretty good job on the broadcast between Hinch and Townsend kind of explaining that this really wasn't like an intentional maneuver by really either of them. It was just a really bad moment for both drivers. I think that Power's car kind of naturally rotated out of the corner, and there really just wasn't space for another car there that he had, bargained for to that point. So I think you could put the blame on Power more or less, but I would say this one was, probably like 60-40. I do think that Rasmussen trying to get to Will Power's right rear at that point in the corner was just not going to be a path towards success, and it unfortunately unfolded exactly that way. With all that said, though, Rasmussen definitely had one of the best cars all day and is sensational on these ovals because he is just totally brave when it comes to being out there. And I feel like a lot of his competitors he catches sleeping because he's willing to put his car in position to go make those passes. So certainly won't be the last time we see Rasmussen up at the front of one of these events. But at the same time, I also think that Rasmussen has some justification for feeling how he feels. Obviously, he was very clearly there, and the contact did ultimately end up unraveling his race. At the end of the day, though, you also have to be responsible for where you put your car and what ends up happening when you put your car there. And I think that at the end of the day, this was just a racing deal more so than anything else. But Power definitely could have been a little bit more aware of his surroundings, much like I said about Palou.
I have to agree. I feel when it comes to this incident, it was a hard racing incident because we know Will Power, he wants to get that win. He wants to have a good finish, especially the disappointment of St. Petersburg. And he's known to race hard. He's not an easy driver to get around. Christian Rasmussen, I mean, we saw what he did in Milwaukee last year. He makes that outside work. He's not afraid to get towards the wall. But when you do that, you run that risk of need the other driver to give you space. Last time in Milwaukee, Palou gave him that space and he got around. This time, it's easy to look at it and think, oh, Will Power did not give you the space. And Will Power said he did not know he was there. But when you look at the wall contact, really, they weren't fully side by side. Once Rasmussen hit the wall and bounced back off the wall, that's when he hit Will Power's tire and popped it. So I just see it as a hard racing incident. Of course, Rasmussen is disappointed. He's angry. When it comes to the road courses, Ed Carpenter Racing is not exactly the top three teams. When it comes to the ovals, Rasmussen just is on another level with these short ovals. So he felt like the best chance for a race win is now gone. He's going to go out there, of course, race hard week in and week out. But similar to how, like in NASCAR, you got those drivers, they see Talladega, they see Daytona, Atlanta as their opportunity to get the win. He probably views these ovals as those opportunities, and that's one that slipped by, mainly because of hard racing. Nobody could convince Rasmussen to say, oh, you should have backed off and tried again. That's something where if Rasmussen feels like maybe if I did back off and just try to get that strong run, because there was still quite a lot of laps left, That's something where if he thinks that could have been an option, he'll make that call. But he says the best racers when it comes to open wheels on the ovals. He knows how to win it. Did he manage this race well? Well, he did for the most part. Could you say it was overly aggressive? You could say that maybe, but I just see this as hard racing. I think at the heat of the moment, talking to Will Power, I mean, it's not going to be often that these two are racing each other side by side at all. So I think that will bypass, and I don't anticipate any sort of like retaliation between the two of them.
Yeah. Hopefully, we won't see a retaliation like that. On an oval track in the future, that would be extremely dangerous, could potentially injure and kill someone. So I think the chances of that happening are extremely unlikely. But I do tend to agree that this was just an unfortunate racing incident. Between the two, I see Christian Rasmussen's side obviously because he obviously had a very quick car and he's becoming like one of the masters of the short ovals, as we saw as he got his first career win last year at Milwaukee, which really surprised a lot of people. Nobody really saw that coming. And Rasmussen is also a driver who is drawn the ire of so many in the IndyCar paddock. A lot of the drivers get so frustrated racing this guy because as already been said, he likes to put the car in places where a lot of drivers wouldn't go. If drivers don't want to make an overtake on the outside cut too sketchy, guess where Christian Rasmussen is going? He is going on the outside, trying to take that move. He makes these decisions, in obviously a split second, and he's going for it. He's a very aggressive young driver. And for better or worse, he's entertaining to watch on these oval tracks because he's making these daring moves that a lot of drivers will not make. And he's certainly basically a highlight reel when you really think about it. So I understand why he's really upset because this could have been a second career IndyCar win if it hadn't been for this incident. And also you look at Will Power as well. Is after two races, certainly not the start he wanted to his Andretti Global tenure. Disappointment last week in St. Pete, and also disappointment again at Phoenix. And I believe Will Power is outside the top 20 in points if I remember correctly. I know it's still early in the season. He can make a lot of movement, between now and the end of the season. But I'm sure he would have wanted to do more. Yeah, after leaving Team Penske after all those years with the captain's organization, and for Will Power, coming to the street circuit in Arlington, Texas this coming week. We know Will Power has always been strong on street tracks. So and Andretti has also put out strong cars on the street tracks, as well. And you want to look at his teammate Kyle Kirkwood has been one of the favorites since he's a really good street racer, and Marcus Ericsson's also run well in the street. So maybe that will bode well for Will Power. So maybe he can look at St. Pete and Phoenix and say that those are, I've used up my two mulligans, that the season for me really begins this weekend on the streets of Arlington, and so he can finally start coming up to grips with how the Andretti car handles and how the Honda engine works, because he was with Chevrolet all those years with Team Penske. So he's with a different team that does things differently, also with a different engine supplier as well. So we'll have to see if Will Power can get his season trending in the right direction starting this coming weekend. And in regards to Rasmussen's, warning to Power, I think that was, just heat of the moment. He was angry. I don't think he's really going to do anything about that by the time they get to Texas this coming weekend. Probably going to be moved on from that situation, and he's going to, try to continue progressing in the 2026 season. And, this race in general at Phoenix Raceway, the 1 mile Arizona short oval, we had a lot of action and many praised IndyCar's return to Phoenix. We had a good crowd, and of course, many for NASCAR, and many came to see NASCAR on this doubleheader weekend. I believe there was also some data showing that for some of these, fan bases, for the IndyCar crowd, this was their first time seeing NASCAR cars in person, and vice versa. For the NASCAR crowd, this was their first time seeing IndyCar. So both audiences, got exposed to something new, which is a really good thing. Now that we've had this NASCAR IndyCar doubleheader, and looking at some of the tracks we've had in the past, we obviously lost Iowa Speedway from an IndyCar schedule, but we gained Phoenix with the return of that track. But we still have Gateway, the Milwaukee Mile doubleheader, and we still have the bigger oval tracks, with Nashville Super Speedway, and of course the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. Joe, after seeing how well Saturday short oval race went, did Phoenix strengthen the argument that IndyCar needs to continue to add more ovals, and specifically more short ovals?
I would say yes. I do feel this race was a big win for IndyCar, for NASCAR as well, but particularly for IndyCar. The number of fans that this is my first time coming to an IndyCar race, and they saw a really good race with what Christian Rasmussen can do. For folks that I've heard of Alex Palou, well, you didn't get to see what he can do because he was out early, but you were able to see just how diverse this field is when it comes to the international talent, the different racing styles of all the drivers, and the speeds of IndyCar on these short ovals because they have all that downforce they could carry around the corners. So we know for a long time there's been talks about, well, Richmond was going to be on the schedule, then the pandemic hit. I know we lost Iowa, but it seems like maybe that was more due to the unfortunate circumstances with sponsorship change, promoters, there's the track not being exactly to the liking of IndyCar racers lately with the partial repave. Maybe they could come back someday. But overall, I'm hoping we see a good number of ovals. I mean, we had that comment earlier in the show about Michigan. That could be a great doubleheader race weekend, and we know IndyCar used to race there. I've always been curious about how would IndyCar handle Darlington up against the wall in such narrow corners. That could be potentially a really fun race in a market IndyCar doesn't really visit that much in the Southeast, the Carolinas. So I would love to see more ovals, and especially the short ovals, because I think this is where we're seeing some of those great racing. When it comes to the big ovals, I know there's just more Michigan that stands out. Really, Fontana's gone. Pocono, I don't think people want to exactly go back to anytime soon. So I think the short ovals could be a good area to say, hey, we may not have that many big ovals like Indy and Michigan, but we're still a very diverse season with these short ovals that have different shapes, such as Milwaukee to Phoenix. You throw in there another short oval. Why not? I don't know. Could IndyCar have enough space to run in North Wilkesboro?
I don't know about all that, Joe. But yeah, I mean, to go back to the question at hand, I think that obviously this race was very strong, start to finish, engaging action all over the racetrack, and was frankly impossible to ignore. With that said, I think that it definitely strengthens the argument for more ovals on the IndyCar calendar. I think that in general, they tend to produce the best possible racing product for these style of cars. They are also, unfortunately, the most dangerous ones as well, because obviously you're in an enclosed environment. There are more laps, so more opportunities to get into more accidents. With that said, it seems that the drivers have been able to do a great job in recent years of making sure that they take care of themselves and their competitors a lot better. And as a result, we've seen a lot less terrifying crashes. Obviously, Josef Newgarden's wreck with Louis Foster at Gateway last year notwithstanding. All of that in the rear view, I think I would love to see IndyCar maybe take a trip to Rockingham or potentially to Charlotte. Homestead is obviously one that very much intrigues me as a possibility. If they can get Memphis Motorsports Park going again, I think that would be an interesting track for them to visit if they aren't able to go back to Richmond or Iowa for that matter. And I just think that short oval racing provides, such engaging, such an engaging racing product. You get to see the passes kind of happen and formulate in the driver's brain if you're on their onboard. And I find that to be particularly fascinating at such high speeds because, let's face it, you watch the IndyCar race at Phoenix and the mid-corner speeds are in the 140s and even at some cases on fresh rubber, the 150s. But if you contrast that with NASCAR, they're at like 110 at best, usually in the center of the corner. So it tends to be a pretty big difference in terms of how different racing series attack different tracks. And I think that this kind of continued collaboration between these two top American racing series can only be to the benefit of American motorsports at this point. Obviously, they're both facing an existential threat in Formula One, encroaching on their turf, so to speak. And I think them banding together and trying to get the most out of each other's series can only stand to benefit both of them. And I think this weekend and the Indy Road Course race weekend that used to take place earlier this decade, I think that both of those combined are hopefully building a building block for what we can expect going forward between Roger Penske's series and Jim France's series.
Yeah, Dan, I totally agree with you. I think we're all better together when we have both NASCAR and IndyCar working together on race weekends like this. And I think when you look at the IndyCar race in general, I think the reason why one of the reasons why the product was so good was due to the excess amount of rubber on the racetrack. If it wasn't for the general tire from the ARCA Menard series, but mostly the Goodyear tires from the Cup series and the O'Reilly Auto Parts series, if it wasn't for that, I have a feeling this Phoenix race might look exactly what it looked like the last time we were here. Just basically procession. Follow the leader. And if you try to make passing outside, it might be incredibly sketchy, but with the extra rubber on the racetrack, I really think it produced a really racy track for IndyCar series, which is exactly why we were able to see drivers move up and down the running order and able to make those overtakes, because when they were at Phoenix before, they wouldn't have been able to make those moves. So I think that really helped. So for IndyCar's sake, they should probably not go back to Phoenix if as a standalone event. I think them being there with NASCAR really helps them out as well, and we'll love to see a lot more of these double headers in the future. Joe, I know you said Darlington. Yeah, that would be fun, but unfortunately, given the way the track is, how narrow it is, I don't really think Darlington would be a realistic possibility for IndyCar. Unfortunately, but I do like maybe a Rockingham or North Wilkesboro. I think that would be really fun, or Charlotte Motor Speedway as well. Try to come into the NASCAR market. But I remember back when there was an IndyCar race back in the day at Charlotte, I think that was a terrible accident, and I don't know if you remember that, Joe, where some people killed in that. If I remember, and then IndyCar swore never to go back to Charlotte again because of that incident, but times have changed, so maybe that could be a possibility in the future. And you mentioned Richmond used to it was supposed to be on the schedule before COVID happened, and then it went away, so maybe that could be a realistic possibility. And Mick Schumacher, when he did his first oval test, he was at Homestead, so maybe we could see a Homestead come back. I think that would be really great. If you want to get a short oval Richmond, that would be wonderful as well. I know if a handful of years have passed, since Robert Wickens' scary accident at Pocono, and then I believe Sato had a really scary crash shortly after that. He was upside down at Pocono. I wonder if enough years have passed where we consider going back to Pocono Raceway, because I think it'd be great to have a mix of short ovals. I would like to see a mile and a half on the schedule. Maybe if we want to try to get a super speedway back on the schedule besides besides Indianapolis, maybe we consider looking at Pocono once again. Although that track would probably need some upgrades if we wanted to try to bring IndyCar back to try to reduce the chances of a Wickens accident from occurring. Although that could occur regardless of any safety innovations that you could have. So we'll see if IndyCar decides to add more ovals to the schedule moving forward. And I believe that's all we have tonight, for IndyCar. And we only have one more series to talk about, which is the Repco Supercars Championship, which was one of the sports series this weekend for the Formula One Australian Grand Prix, Joe.
Lot going on this weekend. The Supercar series was a lot of fun over on Melbourne with Formula One during the race weekend. 4 races this weekend, and overall, Supercar series delivering a good race where we saw Brody Kostecki won 3 of the 4 races. Brock Feeney in his Ford completed the Ford Grand Prix sweep with victory in race number 3. But Feeney suffered significant damage in a big crash on the final race of the race weekend. Triple H feels confident they could get that chassis ready and up and running for the next round, which will be at New Zealand, a double header. He fell to 3rd in the standings, though, behind Brody Kostecki and Cam Waters. And then when you look at the standings, Will Brown, 13th. Not exactly that great of a start, but we've seen the pace that they have. And, of course, Ford 1, 2, 3, 4, with Matt Payne in 4th being there, and Anton Esquicali in 5th, the lone Chevrolet driver. The highest Toyota right now is Ryan Woods in 7th place. So 7 races down in the 2 race weekends we've had for the Supercar Series. Kobe, does this feel like the field? Do they look much closer this year compared to past seasons of Supercar competition?
Oh well. At this point of the season, it looks like it's anyone's game. Towards the top of the standings, and I think the big winner from this weekend, obviously had to be Brody Kostecki. Winning 3 out of 4 races. He could have very well, had a weekend sweep there, but Brock Feeney ended up getting one of those. But I think Brody, obviously going to have the most momentum. It really seemed like if that was a car you want to be in right now, Supercar is certainly the Fords. It seemed like Ford is really have a good package right now, and then Chevrolet's there, as you mentioned, Anton De Pasquale there in 5th. Chevrolet's trying to catch up to the Fords, but it really seems like that they're doing really well right now. And then we all knew when Triple Eight left Chevrolet for Ford that there would be a gap there. It would be really hard to fill the shoes of Triple Eight, because in Triple Eight with Chevrolet they were winning most of the races. Now that they were at Ford, it looks like that they could very well be up there winning a lot of the races as well, which means that Team 18, the homologation team, and the other Chevrolet teams, they're gonna really have to step up their game to try to achieve at least a slice of the success that we've seen from AAA and General Motors over the years. And looking at the Toyota Supra as well, I think that car is finally coming along, because Ryan Wood got the first podium for Toyota in Supercars with this new GR Supra that they debuted this year. So I think Toyota will continue to develop that car, and we may very well see it winning a race later on at some point this season. No, they got off to a slow start, but that's to be expected. We have a brand new car, and I saw a lot more speed out of the Toyotas this weekend. And as they continue to improve that package, I'll look for Ryan Wood and Chaz Mostert to slowly creep up the standings and finally get off on the right foot. But yeah, it seems quite competitive right now. When you look at the standings, have no idea how this season is going to go, but it's nice that there's some unpredictable elements to this year's Supercar season as we have a couple of rounds down now.
Indeed, I think that this year's field is much closer simply because there is a bit more technological field spread, so to speak, because we have added a third manufacturer to the loop. And I think next year will be even stronger, as Toyota will have a whole year of data to go off of and things like that. But right now, everything's turning up Ford. Obviously, Chevy is still trying to, adapt in a world without Triple Eight being under their banner. And I think that they'll be adjusting to that throughout much of the season. I think that Chevy probably is going to be the third manufacturer this year, which sounds absolutely insane after the year that they had in 2025. But they lost their golden goose to Ford, and it's looking like Ford is really turning the wick up. And as I mentioned earlier, these technological advancements by adding a third manufacturer into the loop, it helps reorganize the manufacturer pecking orders all the way down. And when you really look at it, obviously Dick Johnson Racing has had a very, very strong start to the season with Brody Kostecki, while obviously Triple Eight's kind of picking up where they left off to some extent, having won a good few of the first few races here. Now, all that said, I think 2 race weekends in, it's really hard to tell who is going to be a true title contender, especially with this final system that they have in place that did not produce great returns last year. We'll just be frank about that. But at the end of the day, the Toyotas are showing some strength very early. Chad Mostert had a very solid run going for parts of the weekend. Unfortunately, didn't have all of them go his way, while Ryan Wood, as Kobe mentioned, did pull off his Toyota's very first podium. So I think the Toyota will slowly, steadily creep their way into the picture as the season goes on, as they get a little bit more data and everything like that under their belts. But right now it's looking like a Ford party up at the front of the Supercars field. And Brody Kostecki and Brock Feeney are looking very, very formidable for the title. But I'm hoping that we'll see a little bit more variance throughout the field as the manufacturers start to, kind of get their bearings beneath them for the 2026 season.
Yeah, I feel once the manufacturers get more and more of the data and everything all aligned, we could see some really good close competition. And Toyota, they're only getting better, so it's going to be a lot of fun to see how the rest of the supercar season will play out. And of course, supercars, part of the grid ranking, we're counting down to the first Sunday of April when week 1 will be released. We're just about out of time, so we'll throw it to Kobe for the shining moment.
Yeah, that's right. Let us know down in the chat below whether you're watching here live or on replay. What's the one thing that stood out to you the most from this racing weekend? We had a lot to choose from this weekend, whether it was Formula One or supercars on the streets of Albert Park in Melbourne, Australia, or NASCAR and INDYCAR in the Valley of the Sun in Phoenix. So I believe we're going to start off with Joe this time. What's your one shining moment?
My shining moment is going to come from Phoenix, and it's going to go to the organizers and everybody that made this race weekend possible, a doubleheader with NASCAR IndyCar. The biggest winners, the fans. To hear the numbers of how there was a lot of people watching one of those races for the first time, just going to grow interest into the other brand. And motorsports, I know there's always going to be those fans that, Formula One's the best. NASCAR's the best, or NASCAR racing is not top level. Formula One is. You're always going to have those fans. But to have fans that say, hey, I love motorsports, I love watching NASCAR, IndyCar, Formula One, those are the kind of fans that I think really help the sport more than anything, because they're passionate about motorsports, because there's so many young drivers, the junior leagues, working their way up. They may think, my route is Formula One, but then they make a detour somewhere, end up in IndyCar or NASCAR, or somebody in the United States. Maybe they seem destined for NASCAR, but then they make that trip overseas and end up in Formula racing. It's always great to have fans see different disciplines and respect other disciplines of motorsports. So I think for me, the shining moment has to be the Phoenix race weekend, the organizers and everybody that came together to make this possible. Hopefully they do it again next year. And hopefully they do it at another track as well, too, like Michigan, as we've hinted in this show.
Indeed. My one shining moment, conversely, will also take place as part of the Phoenix race weekend. But for me, it's the Penske perfect sweep, and specifically the two drivers, Josef Newgarden and Ryan Blaney. Let me spin a yarn for you folks quick. On the final restart, with 32 laps to go, Josef Newgarden had new tires on and started in 10th of, I believe, 16 lead lap race cars at the time. And that man managed to carve his way up into the top 5 within about 8 laps. And then he let his car cool off for a little bit while he let Pato O'Ward continue to hound whoever in third was at the time. It was David Malukas, his teammate. And then with 20 to go, Newgarden was about 3.5 seconds back and absolutely lit a fire under himself for the next 5 laps, cutting that gap in half in that time. He picked his way past Pato and then by Malukas the lap after that. And from there, everything just kind of fell in place for him. Rasmussen, obviously coming to 10 to go, got into the wall and then did it again the very next time, coming out of turn 2 as well, allowing both Kyle Kirkwood, the other Andretti driver, to slip on by, and Newgarden as well. And then Rasmussen's race obviously unraveled from there. And then Newgarden picked off Kirkwood very quickly and sped off to his first win of the season. And frankly, it'll probably be his first of a few. So hats off to the 2 team. And then Ryan Blaney. What an exhibition and perseverance from that man. He had to pass 49 race cars today. That is obviously way more than usually enter a race in NASCAR's highest division. And he did it without really getting into many people. obviously, a lot of guys in the Cup Series are known to be a bit more aggressive, and Blaney is not one of those kinds of guys. Outside of his little nudge that he gave to Christopher Bell right before I want to say it was the second SVG caution had come out when he and Austin Dillon got together. But regardless, Ryan Blaney with an incredible finish to his race after trying and all the tribulations that he had to go through to come away with the victory is a monumental effort from the driver and the team in perseverance, leading to a Penske perfect race weekend. So, all that said, Kobe, who's your Grid 1 shining moment?
Well, my shining moment is gonna go to a driver from Formula One's Australian Grand Prix. Got to give a call to Arvid Lindblad for having a spectacular Formula One debut, and Lindblad showed us exactly why Red Bull is so high on his potential, and giving Max Verstappen's growing discontent with the new regulations and threats to walk away from the sport. It looks like Lindblad is in the right place, because if Max ever decides that he wants to leave in the short term, Lindblad will probably move up and be a Red Bull driver, after spending some time with Racing Bulls, getting that experience. But for his first Formula One race, I thought it went as well as it possibly could have gone for him. I know he had that great start. He was as high as third at one point, even got around Isaac Hadjar the Red Bull. So that was really exciting from Arvid to show that type of start. And then he obviously fell back as the race went on, but he did a really good job. Didn't make any errors, and he was able to have a solid debut and score points. So yeah, I thought Arvid Lindblad had a really great Formula One debut, and I think it shows sign of potential what could happen in the future. And this is a really young kid. He's coming straight out of Formula 2. I thought he had a decent Formula 2 career. I think obviously he didn't. Well, from my perspective, he didn't show as much as I thought he would show in Formula 2. But I certainly think he's on the path to doing great things in Formula 1. Although it is one race, so we're really looking forward to seeing how he progresses and develops throughout the season. I do remember I was very critical of Lindblad on last year. And then, we have the Grid Rising show now. Tanner, if we had Grid Rising last summer during, I believe it was Monza race weekend, Arvid Lindblad would have been my weapon of the week, because he ended up crashing two cars on the exact same lap. And I was very, very critical of how awful that was. It was just really crazy. On the same lap, he ended up taking two drivers out of the race. And then in the second incident, he ended up taking himself out too, because he had severe nose damage. And since that moment in Monza, he's grown quite a lot as a driver, and I think that this is a small snapshot of what we could see him do in the future, for what we saw from him on the streets of Melbourne at Albert Park.
Yep, and before we go, we do have a comment here from Humperdinck. Shining moment for me goes to Kayla Yakov for being the first woman to podium at the Daytona 200. Wow. Yes, very impressive result from her. And obviously, before we leave, we would like to extend a happy International Women's Day to those out there. Obviously, are very happy to have a lot of great women on our staff here at Grid Network, and we're happy to share this space with them. And obviously, shout out to all the women participating in sports and keeping all the cars on the racetrack.
Indeed, it was happy International Women's Day. And of course, yesterday we had Nicole on the air for the quite first time for F1, and we'll do it all over again next weekend. Of course, tomorrow, Tanner and Matt will be on the air at Grid Rising. Wednesday, Grid Tonight with Kobe. We'll preview the Grand Prix of China, and then we'll wrap it all up right here next week. So be sure to subscribe, hit that bell icon so you don't miss any of our programs. The bell icon notifies you every time we go on the air, across the internet at Grid Network TV, across social media, our website, and consider investing in us through Patreon, link in the video description. Big thank you to Colin, Michelle, Mark, Robin, David, Matthew, Crystal, and Nico for investing in us each and every month. For Kobe and Tanner, I'm Joe. Thank you for watching today's program. We'll see you next time.